Good morning, everyone. Clay, the drummer, the little drummer boy, the big drummer boy.
I couldn't hear it. You didn't have to tell me.
Oh, sorry. Clay was drumming. You guys missed it. Next time.
It was really impressive, too.
It was very impressive.
Good morning, folks.
How's it going? Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield here with Clay Aiken. Don't forget to like Bold TV on Facebook and make sure that you join the conversation. We've got a lot going on, and I know you guys have very passionate feelings and thoughts about all of this because, as usual, Trump is the news gift that keeps on giving, and we have a lot of stuff.
Fire.
That's his words, not mine. And yeah, so
do you think they really thought that I spoke for you in any way? No, not at all. Although
I'm just saying I don't endorse them.
I must say, I mean, there's big news this week, obviously, but it's been a quieter week from the Trump administration than we have had over the past weeks, over the past month. Don't you think it's been something, one big, huge piece of news, and then, I think it effectively did what I believe he sort of wanted it to do. Change the subject from some of the scandals that his administration has been embroiled in over the past several months. Do you think that had anything to do with why he made this big show of teasing out this announcement on Paris and announcing it?
The way he did it was definitely like a big teaser. It was sort of like, we got a 60 minutes investigation and we're going to roll it out. Not today. We're going to do it in a few days. I'm going to do it at 3 o'clock.
After the commercial.
Yes, exactly.
It's very much the reality show version of it.
He's brilliant TV. I mean, he knows TV, obviously.
He does, but what's also, it's drama, but he turned what really shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone, because he talked about pulling out of, obviously, I think people know we're talking about his withdrawal, the U.S.'s withdrawal from the Paris climate deal. He talked about withdrawing from the Paris climate deal during the campaign. I think we all expected him to do it. I don't know that we saw any reason, or I saw any reason, that he was not going to do it. But somehow he got us all to tune into this, brass band and announcement in the Rose Garden yesterday, because that's kind of what he is. He's a showman. He's P.T. Barnum more than he's anything else. Do you think the news was as disruptive as people thought it was going to be? Not the result of it, but the news itself?
Well, that was the drama, and we're going to talk more about this later in the show in terms of the staffing shakeup, but there was word on the street, and this is what I'm really interested to know, because as you said, he's a performer. Was he actually grappling with this issue, or has he already made up his mind before anything ever happened? Because there's the warring factions of the Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Secretary Tillerson camp, and then on the other side, the Steve Bannon, the Pruitt, the other side of the camp where people were saying, let's get out of this thing.
Yeah,
so,
it's
I don't
fascinating.
know.
It's fascinating to me, and I think the biggest question that I have post-Paris climate extraction is, how much influence does Ivanka Trump have? I think she has gone in. She told Gayle King. She's told many people that she is trying to pick her battles, and she wants to use her influence in very focused places and focused ways. And she has not been shy to say that climate change is sort of her big deal. She brought Al Gore to Trump Tower after Donald Trump won. She spoke to Leonardo DiCaprio. She's done a lot of work. She kind of rallied the business world to kind of help her get her father to not pull out of the Paris climate change. It's the one topic that she's really said she wanted to make a difference on, and yet she lost. And not only did she lose, she wasn't there yesterday. Trump made his announcement during a Jewish holiday, so she was home, not involved in not even at the White House.
Do you think he did that on purpose that way?
I don't know. I'd hope that he wouldn't have, but if he did, that's pretty awful towards his daughter, and how much influence, if any, that I believed she might have had. What does this say about how much she has?
Well, we debated this on the show, and we want to know your thoughts. And make sure, if you love our show, to share it.
Does Ivanka Trump still have any?
Yeah, what do you think? And also, what do you think about the decision overall of the Paris Accords? So my take on the Ivanka thing is, I think that this is actually good for people who are worried about nepotism. So a lot of people came in and said, we are so worried the fact that Jared Kushner has this huge portfolio of things that he's working on, and that Ivanka, his blood daughter, is going to be able to just, pull strings and get whatever she wants. That didn't happen in this case.
But it's also bad news for those people who believed that they would be a moderating force and would keep him from doing some pretty awful things. To the question of how detrimental is this for the U.S. I'm in the camp that certainly believes that it's a huge mistake to pull out of the Paris climate deal. I am not necessarily in the camp that is as worried about what it does for the climate in the short term as some are, but I do think that it's irresponsible for the same reasons that Rex Tillerson. I mean, I'm not in the Rex Tillerson camp at all, but I agree with him that one of the major reasons to have stayed in this was the importance of working together globally, and that's sort of what Donald Trump ran against. And as I listened to his speech, I have to say, I don't think it had anything to do with climate change for him. I think the extraction from the deal was solely because he was able to use it to play to that base of America first. And I believed going into that speech, when we knew he was going to pull out, that his entire speech was going to be about nobody else in the world is going to tell us what to do. We're strong. We're going to run our country the way we want to run our country. And that's exactly what he did. It was one of the most dismal and cynical speeches that we've heard, certainly the most cynical and dismal that we've heard from him since his inauguration speech.
Well, I don't think it was dismal at all. I thought it was...
There's a surprise.
No, it's like, for me, it keeps getting better. I am so shocked. I was not expecting Trump to do what I was excited about, but it happened. So I have an op-ed on Bold.Global right now about my take on pulling out.
Well, tell us now. People will go and read it.
Well, Zach actually from Team Bold, he made this point where he was saying that, this thing didn't have any teeth. There was no legal enforcement mechanism. So I think you're right, Clay, in the sense that this was not something... No, Zach's promoted.
He didn't.
No, this didn't have any legal teeth. So in terms of, actual structural changes to what we were going to do, it was more kind of a gentleman or gentlewoman's agreement. So it had to do more with, just rescinding from an Obama era sort of agreement. I made the point in my op-ed that any sort of treaty-like, or if it smells like a duck, it quacks like a duck, whatever that analogy goes.
It quacks like a duck. Yes, definitely. If it does that, we should be afraid of it.
If it walks like a duck, whatever. It's a treaty, and the treaty should go to the Senate. And the Senate is the one.
But you did just admit that it didn't have teeth, so therefore it wasn't a treaty. So it didn't walk like a duck or quack like a duck because it wasn't a treaty. And I mean, we were able to pull out of it because there was not a treaty. But to your point about it being a gentleman's agreement, I think that is why Rex Tillerson and many people believe it was more important to stay in it, because this was, we have now joined the ranks of Nicaragua and Syria, which I believe are the only two other countries that did not in the world that did not sign on to this.
I don't buy that argument because
don't buy it because
because during World War II we were the only ones that were standing up against the Nazis successfully. So you know what?
That is certainly a great comparison.
No, it is in the sense that it doesn't matter if you are correct. It doesn't matter who's wrong. It matters that you're standing up for what you believe is right.
So Donald Trump suggested that admittedly, France, Italy, and Germany, I believe, have already come out and said we're not doing this, so it doesn't matter. But Donald Trump suggested that we were leaving the Paris climate deal, but we might go back into it if we renegotiate a better deal. What would be a better deal, Carrie?
Well, for example, China and India, who are the worst, polluters right now in terms of the growth in pollution, the accord did not require any retractive improvement. It was about reducing future emissions, whereas the U.S. would have had to retroactively reduce emissions. That double standard, I think, was a big problem, especially given what Trump was saying on the campaign trail about, China is eating our lunch when it comes to trade. So this was another example of China restarting itself in a way that put the U.S. at a disadvantage. So if we can restructure the Paris Accord, then that would make sense, I think.
Well, listen, I don't know that people would disagree that it would be a wonderful situation if we could get China and India to regressively reduce their emissions. But there is an argument. I think there's always in politics this argument about what's more important, getting exactly what you want or making progress that you wouldn't make otherwise. And I think that's a situation that they were in 2015 in Paris, which was, if we want to get China and India to the table, we have to do it on terms that we can get them to the table on. And asking them to do the things that America was doing was simply not going to get them to the table. And it's better to take, many people believe it's better to take a step forward than no step forward at all. And America was in a position because A, we're capable of it, B, we have been in the past and are slowly not being now the moral leader of the world. And we knew that we were in a position to make changes that we knew needed to be made anyway. I mean, these are not things that, it wasn't a treaty. We weren't bound to it. It was a gentleman's agreement, as you said. But they were things that we needed to do anyway. They were emissions that we needed to reduce anyway. If we could make agreement to do something that we already knew we needed to do, and in return get some sort of agreement from China and India, then we should do that. But peer pressure is really what kind of drives everything. Do you recycle at your house?
Well, in New York, you have to. It's the law.
It is the law, but it's not necessarily enforced. But most people,
I recycle. Yes.
But for years it wasn't, and most people recycled because if you didn't, and your neighbors did, and if they found out you didn't, you just peer pressure has drives a lot of the world. And
FYI, I talked to my friend who helped Al Gore get his Nobel Science Prize. He's a Harvard professor of climate science, and he said that recycling is basically a wash because it takes a lot of energy to actually recycle the material and put it to something else.
But yet we still do it.
It's kind of one of these like psychological, like make you feel good.
You make my point.
And I think
but you make my point because I don't disagree that it sort of is a wash, but we still do it because everybody else does it, and we look like douches if we don't.
No, because just because it makes you feel good doesn't mean it's going to have an actual impact. And I think, Clay, that you rightfully conceded that point, which is that, MIT did a study that said if every single climate, a participant in this agreement did everything to the full extent, it still would have a very negligible impact on actual climate emissions, just because of the growth in the economy. So I think the solution here is really got to be an economic one in terms of we have to stop and I had a debate with somebody from Vice about this yesterday, and I think we both agreed, let's stop subsidizing oil companies. I think it makes no sense that we're subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. Like, we have to let these industries compete on their own. Same thing as we have to let the clean energy jobs compete on their own. So
Judy Anderson on Facebook says, but doesn't the U.S. want to be a leader setting an example?
Well, Judy, we are. I mean, our emissions have dropped down by 12.6% since 2006.
So why not use that? And that's great. So why not use that as a continued carrot to make sure that China and India continue to fulfill their promises? Whether they have to retroactively reduce emissions or not, they have committed to reducing emissions going forward. If the U.S. pulls out and China pulls out, yes, you can make an argument that the effect might be negligible. Yes, it might be only a degree or two over the next several years. But if they don't reduce those emissions, then we're in a much worse shape than we would have been in. And I think that, I guess, again, it's one of those situations where, is it the best deal possible? Yes, but a deal is better than no deal at all. And this is not something, in my opinion and many people's opinion, that is responsible to pull out of because, A, it's a deal that's better than nothing, and B, we now have said essentially to the rest of the world.
Well, it's important to note that the reason why we had the drop in our emissions was because of shale, was because of natural gas, was because of this boom in the economic side of things
fossil fuels.
that made it, well, these were fuels that were cleaner. And to your point, something in between is better than nothing. So it's better to go
arguably cleaner.
If we're moving from coal to natural gas, this is better for the environment. Like, let's do that. That's the innovative way to do things. And then let's also make sure that we're not subsidizing fossil fuels. Let's have a level playing field for solar and cleaner energy to make sure that it's competing in a natural economic way. And then everybody wins. Because honestly, it is an economic incentive for car companies, for example. A consumer wants to have a more efficient tank of gas. If I can go 40 miles versus 80 miles, I'm going to want to get the car that has 80 miles. Of course, that's a no-brainer.
I don't know that is necessarily the issue, because you're dead right about that. The market does improve. The market does help car companies be incentivized to create cars that are more fuel efficient. Electric cars have been on an upswing specifically because of that. But the market doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how companies pollute or use, how they make those cars. Yes, they're making fuel efficient cars, but are they using more fossil fuels to do so? Are they emitting more carbon to do so? And the market has very little control over that. And I think that's something that we must address. Now, this deal that we've pulled out of, actually, we haven't pulled out. We didn't pull out of it yesterday. You have to give a year's notice to pull out of it. You have to. There's 4 years. So, so as a matter of fact, it doesn't actually officially end until the day after the next presidential election in 2020. it is certainly, I believe, worthy of being a campaign issue next time around, because the next president who goes into office has the ability to rejoin the climate deal, because I honestly don't believe there will be any renegotiation whatsoever.
No, I don't think the Senate's going to pick this up, whether they consider it a treaty or not. Let's pull in a few comments here. Sabrina Adams says, remember, we're not saving the planet. It will survive in one form or another. We are trying to save ourselves and our place on Earth. And Paulette Carletta says, recycling reduces the size of our landfills. And she also says it's not just about America, it's about our world. So, and then Mickey Alessi says, why natural gas? Why not go straight to the right thing, i.e. start putting the planet first? I think that, again, the problem with that is that it's not there. It's not cost effective.
Well, who was it?
So
I think Emmanuel Macron said, I think it was him, who said, in his statement after the president pulled out of this agreement,
it was trolling.
Why can I not?
He was basically said, "Make the world great again."
Let's make
Earth again.
Make the world
Make
great
the
again,
planet.
which I thought was sort of brilliant. I can't think of the word that I wanted to use.
It was good trolling.
He restated the commitment of France and the rest of the world to it, and so mad props to Macron. He shouldn't have shook his hand so damn hard. Donald Trump. He's pissed at you now. There's a lot of other stuff that happened this week.
I watched the speech. Oh yeah, no, that's I watched the Macron speech as well. And I just thought, you know what?
You just watched it because you think he's cute. Don't lie.
Okay, he is cute. Also, I had a technical question because he said our children, and I think his wife is 60 years old. Does he have kids? Because he's only 39.
I don't know.
That's in a sidebar. But anyway, when I heard
have kids,
him,
so anyone can have.
True.
If I can do
That's
it,
true.
anyone can do it.
Yes.
So what else happened this week? We had, Donald Trump came back from his from his trip overseas.
Yep, NATO.
They say it was the most successful trip in history.
Well, it was the most historic in terms of the fact that a U.S. president flew from Saudi Arabia to Jerusalem. That never happens, and you can't even get a commercial flight that way.
Right.
That was innovative, and I thought it was a statement to say we're going to try something different. But at the same time, this week, the president said we are not going to officially recognize the embassy in Jerusalem. So keeping with precedents in that way, but trying to move things differently.
Why do you think he did that? Because that was certainly a campaign promise. Well, many have made it.
Yeah,
but
a lot
not
of presidents have made that promise.
What happens when you become president? Obviously, you get intel. I would argue that Trump may have gotten a lot of intel and just not cared about it. But what is the intel that a president elect or a new president is given that changes that so consistently? Do not move the embassy to Jerusalem. What do they learn? What do you think?
Well, I think part of what Trump learned was that by going to Saudi Arabia and getting those Saudi allies, he also got a lot of Gulf country allies that were at the conference there in Saudi Arabia. And the sense is that if he were to do that in terms of move the embassy to, recognize the capital as Jerusalem, this would really annoy and set off a trigger domino effect to a lot of other countries, not just on that particular conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that a lot of Arab countries, they really take it personal. It's like a proxy kind of conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So it's a much broader issue.
But do you think that's something that I think many people kind of already get. Do you think there's another piece of information, fact or alternative fact, that the president gets that makes it more real to them when they get into office? Because I don't think that, well, Trump may not have known it beforehand, but I don't think most people don't understand the sensitivity of the issue prior to making a promise like that. But then when they get into office, they go, well, okay, maybe I'm not going to do that.
Well, I think especially because Trump is trying to reassert the Sunni alliance, whereas Obama was more focused on the Shiite with the Iranians and Persian influence. So I think if he was trying to get influence among the Sunnis by moving the embassy that way, that really would not work well. That was, I think, part of the triangulation. But also, I think, going there, like I spent some time there. I was a journalist in Jerusalem. When you physically go there and you just get the sense of history, I mean, it's a place that is holy to all three major world religions, Christians as well. So you're really not just getting into the politics of it, you're getting into religion and culture. I mean, it's a hornet's nest if you're going to step into that. I mean, of any people who would step into it, it would be Trump, but even him.
He might get stung.
You don't want to get struck down, I guess.
What was fascinating to me, well, it's not just fascinating to me, because it happens all the time. But upon his return, obviously Sean Spicer gave all these superlatives, how it's the most historic trip in the world, history. It was the most successful trip in history. Arguably, it was. You certainly make a point that there was a historic portion of it. The flight did make a statement and made a change, but it wasn't necessarily more historic. But if you listen to the news on one channel, you hear people talking about how he embarrassed the country, America. They're talking about how he elbowed the Montenegrin president, how the Pope looked completely miserable, and then you look on another channel, we won't say which one, and of course they're talking about how it was historic. So there is obviously a continued media bias. So we're going to bring in our next guest.
That was the perfect segue.
I worked on it real hard. I wouldn't even listen to what you were saying prior to that because I was working on that segue, girl.
Clay rode here on a segue. He's just like, I'm in my segue. Let's make a meme of him on a segue.
Now you've ruined it. It was going to be so smooth.
Sorry.
We'll bring in our next guest, and we're going to talk about a study on media bias that was done recently by the Shorenstein Center at Harvard. Carrie wrote about that on the website. You've been busy writing, girl. Mm-hmm. That's not your article, but that's
about the study. Yeah, we can pull up the study that's the study, and then on the website, go to bold.global.
Where she claims, not proves, but claims.
This was an analysis.
Yeah.
I said that the report in some ways reinforces what Steve Bannon said, which is that the media in many ways is the opposition party. So let's bring our guest and get his perspective on this. Nico Melee, the director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Nico, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be on your show.
Yep, great to have you back on. I remember you were a fellow there when I was a student, so it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, fine alumna.
So just give us a brief rundown for those folks who aren't familiar with the study. What is it? What was the study? It was over the first 100 days of Trump's
Sure. Well, this is actually our fifth study. We looked at the presidential campaign season as well as the first 100 days of Trump. This one in particular is just about the first 100 days of Trump. And we look at some of the major players in media like the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, NBC, Fox, Wall Street Journal, and try and assess what are they covering, how might you rate or score the tone of that coverage, and what are the subjects they're covering. So, for example, in our campaign coverage, looking at the general election, we saw very little coverage of any issues. Almost all the coverage was about polling and scandal for both candidates. In the first 100 days of Trump's study, I think two of the major findings is that the coverage is really overwhelmingly negative for Trump, although that has some historical precedent. Bill Clinton's first 100 days is overwhelmingly negative as well. George W. Bush and Obama both got more balanced coverage in their first 100 days. And the other kind of key thing we looked at is who do they quote in these stories? And they overwhelmingly quote Trump. 65% of the time, Donald Trump's quoted. I believe Democrats are quoted about 6% of the time, and congressional Republicans 4% of the time. And
How is that different?
All Trump all the time.
How is that different from previous studies then for other presidents as far as quotes? Do you have data on?
We have some of that data. I'm not sure we have the exact. We don't have exactly comparable data. But one data we do have for other presidents is how much of the total news coverage the first 100 days was about the president. And in the case of Trump, it was, I believe, 41% of the total news coverage was about Donald Trump. That includes the Cavaliers, right? Includes all news coverage. And that is unprecedented. It's almost triple what most of his predecessors saw. He is getting a giant volume of coverage.
And so do you think that in some ways, so this was, I think the fascinating thing on the campaign trail was that Trump was getting a lot of negative coverage from the mainstream quote unquote press. But for his supporters, it actually ended up being sort of this martyr complex, stoking the flames to say, this is our guy. And the fact that you're being so negative on him, it makes us love him even more.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that's also how Hillary Clinton supporters feel. And in fact, our study of the general election showed that the coverage of both candidates was overwhelmingly negative. The media had nothing positive to say about either candidate.
Is there not? Does that? Go ahead. Sorry.
That's also true. That's also, as we see, true of most U.S. presidents get really negative coverage from the media.
Is that not did that not allow people to make a pretty strong argument that the issue is not necessarily bias towards or against a president, but bias towards the negative in general? And I think that people might argue that ratings are better when you can talk about something in the negative, where you can anger a viewer, where you can be the opposition. I think people would argue that. Is that not an issue?
It's really clear that the media has a major bias towards the negative. And it also has remarkably few ways of telling a story, right? And in the case of Trump, it's a very antagonistic way of telling the story that's all about Trump. There are no other voices in the conversation. And that's troubling. And I think it's especially troubling when you figure the presidency is just one of three branches of government. But with someone like Trump leading it's incredibly compelling, makes great television, as they say. I tend to think that the values of the media are not the values of democracy.
Well, and Nico, and to that point, so when we say that inherently there is sort of this confrontational relationship between an administration and the press, isn't that the structural way it should be? And I got to say, as a former Politico reporter, I think for Capitol Hill, for example, that isn't the case. You have so many journalists who are like best man or bridesmaids for people that they're supposed to be covering, and literally people are in bed with each other. I don't think that really happens on Capitol Hill very much. But I mean, do you think there's a way to mitigate? I mean, shouldn't that be that way in terms of being skeptical?
Certainly, arguably the first job of the press is to hold power accountable. And part of what you see in the negative coverage is actually a bias towards accountability. But I also think the press has a real obligation to tell a broader range of stories.
Let me ask a question about that, because you say a bias towards accountability, and I just want to ask from a very technical point. How do you determine what is negative? Just give us an idea of what.
So the methodology is we identify who the major player in the story is. It's called the newsmaker. Who's the newsmaker? Mm-hmm. And so in a story about the president, Trump is the newsmaker. And then we evaluate the story. If you were Donald Trump, how would you perceive this story? Would you perceive it as negative, positive, or neutral? That's how the methodology works.
But that's somewhat subjective.
It's somewhat subjective, but media in many ways makes that very easy.
And so when you say bias towards accountability, explain that to me too, because are you saying that the media is going above and beyond to try to be antagonistic, to try to be negative, or to just try to be impartial?
I think I wouldn't say bias towards accountability. I'd say it's a bias towards a negative coverage, that negative headlines, negative stories tend to perform better. I believe that the press's main job is accountability, holding power accountable, and sometimes that leads to more negative stories when you're bringing accountability and saying, well, that's not exactly what the data shows, or that's not exactly what happened.
Are there any studies that show? I'm curious. Maybe y'all have done or will do one that show how ratings for a network may or may not perform based on whether the coverage is negative or positive. Fox News has lost quite a bit of ground in the past few months, and some might argue that's because they've had a harder time being anti-something than MSNBC has had being anti right now.
Maybe you'll have me back on your show in a couple of weeks when we release a study in that vein. We look at the Sunday morning political shows and compare the topics and the guests to Nielsen ratings.
Maybe we'll have you back, and maybe you should come here and deliver that study here first. What do you think?
Breaking news, yes, exclusive, bold exclusive.
Thank you, Nico, for joining us. I think it's fascinating. It's a discussion we have a lot on this show about media bias in general, and it's nice to have some. I would say Harvard's pretty impartial. Some nice unbiased data to help guide that discussion.
Carrie was a student here.
Trust me, she tells us all the time.
Whatever, Clay.
And she's not biased at all, right?
Never.
Nico, thank you very much for joining us, Nico Mele from Shorenstein Center at Harvard. So did that justify some of your beliefs? How did you feel about it?
Well, I liked the point that he made that this is sort of inherently structurally part of what journalism is. But I think that the sense from a lot of Trump supporters is that it's unprecedented, the level of negativity versus other administrations.
Well, some progressives would argue, well, don't give us so much material then. I don't disagree that there's a lot more negative coverage of Trump, but I might make the argument that it's a justifiable amount of coverage that he wouldn't be satisfied with. So I think, do better and we won't be so upset.
But also the fact that was interesting that he talked about that the coverage was Trump in his own words. That was,
right,
I think,
the
that
quotes. You can't be
quotes.
biased if you're quoting the man.
Or I guess the follow-up I would ask to him next time we have him on is when he has it in his own words, but then how are you interpreting those words? Because I think that's the issue
It's
too.
very difficult. It's all just a big covfefe. How do you interpret some of those words, right?
Yes.
Karen? Let's go on to
That's
our
rosy-colored glasses. We'll do that next
should
week.
do that.
Yes. And speaking with all of this, we're going to dive into our panel discussion on the possible White House shakeup that we're all wondering about what's going to happen. And we're really excited to have our guests here. We've got Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and businessman and former NBA player Mark Blount. So great to have you both.
Mark Blount,
Yes.
thank you very much for joining us. So we've got news every week. We constantly have a big covfefe. I'm going to have to use it one more time now for the rule of threes. Wait for it. It'll come again. Yeah. One of the not biggest news stories of the week, but one of the discussions that crept into the news a lot more this week is the potential for I say finally because it's about time, for a White House shakeup. Will it matter, do you think, for this president if he were to shake up his administration? There's discussion that Reince Priebus may be on his way out. Who knows? We've seen the communications director resign. He didn't resign and leave immediately. He stuck around, so I'm not sure if he...
Trip, yeah, he
right.
his paperwork before he left.
And he was still there yesterday. So I'm not sure that he necessarily got fired. He might have just resigned because he was tired of trying to translate. But regardless, it doesn't necessarily seem that the president listens to anyone anyway. So would a White House shakeup make a difference?
I mean, I don't see it making a very big difference because he keeps rotating the same group of people in and out, in and out. I mean, if you look, Sam Nunberg, they're now talking about bringing back into the White House. Corey Lewandowski, they're now talking about bringing back into the White House. So he just kind of seems to cycle through the same people over and over again. And it seems like he's surrounding himself with a lot of yes people. And so it's not like there's very much pushback from the people that he has surrounding him. So I don't think it makes very much difference if you're not having a wide variety of opinions or giving people the license to challenge him.
That being said, though, we were just talking about earlier that there does seem to be a lot of diversity of opinion in terms of this climate change thing, for example, the Bannon wing and the wing on the Tillerson wing. Very different perspectives about this. So, I mean, don't you think that there is some representation?
That is true. With climate change, it does seem like Tillerson, Ivanka were supportive of staying in the agreement versus, some of the other members. So I think on that issue, yeah, but it doesn't seem like overall when it comes to domestic policies, especially, that there is very much various ideas, the challenging of opinions.
Well, Mark, you're a former NBA player, former Celtic, but you're also a very successful businessman. Leading a business and understanding what it takes to be a CEO, do you see from the president right now a really strong CEO strategy within his staff?
Just from the election and over the last few months, just watching him, I think it's always been a rush for him to put the people around him he needed to be in office, like finding the individuals for each job. So I felt like they were always rushing into certain individuals.
Is that the way you run your business?
No. Because you look at the changes, all the changes that are going on, and it's like maybe they were, they're going through the list, and the people that that end up taking some of these positions that probably weren't, qualified or ready to be in those positions at this time.
But, as part of, I think it's different, though. Running a country is different from running a business. I think part of the process of rushing or naming people quickly is because you don't have much time. When you win, and reports are that Trump didn't think he was going to win. But I think that's part of it. But
would you not make the argument that every candidate always has some sort of plan in place in case
Exactly.
they win, and he did. He had Chris Christie, who he had appointed to kind of lead the transition, and that
But
either
again,
fell
but
apart.
he
no,
fired
but
him.
that was Jared Kushner.
And he fired him.
No, but that again was the Jared Kushner, because Kushner had a lot of family baggage against Chris Christie.
Fair
and
enough,
so
but
that's
if you're a
part of why he
CEO,
was
do
out.
you make those decisions based on, do you allow your company to fall apart because you can't decide who to listen to, if anyone?
Well, I think it was smart that he got rid of Chris Christie, because Chris Christie's been a terrible governor for New Jersey. They've been
I agree with
downgraded
that.
8 times as a credit. Like, I was a former bond analyst where we would rate states. He's been downgraded 8 times, so I wouldn't trust Chris Christie with my lunch money. Like, he can't manage a
his
budget.
lunch.
He can't manage pensions. Like, I tell it like it is. I don't care if he's a Republican. I mean, he's really great at raising money. He raised like $100 million when he was president
job
of the
for that.
Republican Governors
if that-
Association.
listen, and if
he's
that-
great at politics, but
Well,
policy.
we are right down a rabbit hole again, girl.
Anyway, sorry.
What we're talking about.
But I wanted to ask Mark this. Sorry. When I get down the Chris Christie
Friday.
lane, I can't help it. Anyway, but Mark, I know you do a lot of business with China, and you're an international businessman. What's your sense from your experience with China? How are they viewing Trump? And also, what's their sense on this climate accord?
I just left Shanghai earlier this winter, and it's more of wondering what our president is going to do and how he's going to react. I travel internationally a lot, and everybody always wants to know what's the U.S. We are the leaders in the world. Everybody wants to know what we're doing, and I just tell them that. Right now with our president, coming from his business background and being president, it's going to take a little time, as we see with some of the mishaps he's been having, if you want to call them mishaps. But really, it's more of us being in Asia. I think the most important thing is the communication, the relationship for us there. They really enjoy the U.S. They really enjoy our economy. They enjoy the way we do business here. So I think the most important thing is to continue the relationship, continue the communication part of that, and I think we'll be fine in China. On the European side of that, traveling to Europe is a different monster. It's more of some countries are great to us, some aren't, and some of us, I travel a lot, and I just know that there's a lot of disrespect out there for U.S. In certain areas, and
Is that a new thing?
no, it's been out there. It's been out there in different countries. I won't name some of them right now, but
But you mentioned when you talked about China that they're wondering what's the U.S. going to do, what's the U.S. going to do, and Trump kind of. He talked about it a lot with his foreign policy, his approach to fighting terror. Not that he was not going to share his strategy. He wasn't going to tell people what he is going to do, keep them guessing. He's certainly done that with me.
I think
kept
he's
us
still
all
guessing.
Talking again about his strategy and his leadership style and the people who he surrounds himself with, who I think he also keeps guessing, because let's not pretend Sean Spicer knows what
Poor Sean
the president's going to say after
Poor
he's said
Sean
what the
Spicer.
president says. Is that a style that, it's a style that a lot of people who voted for him really had some confidence in, that really believed this is a good idea. We shouldn't tell people what we're going to do. Is it helping us or is it hurting us? Is it effective? Well, I'll ask you both, but is that something that could be beneficial to us?
Yeah, I actually don't mind the fact that he says he's not going to tell what our foreign policy is when it comes to making decisions about the military. As a Democrat, I actually was critical of the president when he would set dates for the withdrawal of troops and things like that. I think it sends a bad sign. It allows the enemy to kind of know when you're leaving, what the waiting period is. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense policy-wise. With that said,
Totally agree with you there.
right? With that said,
Say something bad about Obama.
if you're not going to tell people what direction you're moving in, you need to give them a sense of confidence and a sense of stability. And I think one of the big problems right now with Trump is the fact that there is so much instability and he is so reactionary. And he warned about that in The Art of the Deal. He talked about how every day he didn't set appointments. He went to the office and kind of allowed things to happen. And that's one of the differences now when you're president.
And he sort of did that with these European European leaders he met, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but he was handing out a cell phone number to European leaders saying, call me whenever you want to. And he keeps that cell phone with him. I don't know that it's a secure line necessarily. But,
it's not.
Do you still have a cell phone number?
I don't think Angela Merkel is, just picking up her phone and tweeting at 3 in the morning.
No.
But there is an argument on both sides, right? As a CEO, as a leader, as a business person, having those interpersonal relationships of being approachable, being accessible.
It was one of the critiques of President Obama, that he wasn't personable when it came to like behind the scenes meetings and doing kind of all that schmoozing.
But
especially with Congress, that he wasn't building those relationships. For example, like maybe you could have gotten a Senate on your side to sign an actual treaty around climate change.
I don't think he's president anymore.
I'm just saying, sorry. So, I know.
We'll be
sorry,
right
not
back down
sorry.
the rabbit hole in
Anyway.
20 seconds. Do you think that approachability, it's really it's a complete change in protocol, is a good thing,
what Mike was saying, I just wanted, he's hiring these people to do their job. They still have to do their job. They're coming in, Spice or anybody. I mean, they still have to do their job. And then sitting back and coming into the office, whatever you say, or coming into the president's office, and like you still have to wonder if the people you have around you are still doing their job, because they have a part to do also.
Well, I think given your experience in NBA, you could talk about making sure that your opponents don't know what your strategy is going into it.
Definitely, but I mean, it's definitely you still gotta go out there and perform, and then
at the same time, the players on the
Your
team
teammates need to know
what the coach wants them to do, right?
Definitely, but the strategy will show itself, but it still has to be relayed. It still has to be brought together. The 5 people on the floor at the time has to be able to work together and communicate at the same time. And it goes back to like I was just saying, that everybody's still accountable and still has a part to play to be successful.
And Mark, you live in Florida, so can you give us a sense of just outside the Beltway and outside the East Coast bubble?
Where in Florida? It's very important to know what part of Florida.
Yeah, I was going to say, what part of Florida are you in?
I lived in several places, but recently I was in Palm Beach Gardens.
Okay. So
but now I'm in Orlando. I live in Orlando.
Middle of the
Okay, Orlando's somewhat bellwether, though. So
Yeah,
what's the
it's
You're right in that I-4 corridor.
So like,
You didn't ask about Palm Beach Gardens, though.
Because we know where Palm Beach Gardens are.
You jumped right into Orlando. You should ask about Palm Beach Gardens first.
We know where that's going.
It's a good mix. So, what is the sense down there?
do people in Orlando care about Russia? Do they care about Jim Comey? Do they know anything about all of this, kerfluffle or whatever the word is?
Cafifi.
I think it's a little bit of mix between the Democrat and the Republicans down there. You get both sides of the stories, just like anywhere else. And
People seem to have planted their flag on one side.
Definitely, and I go out and I'm around downtown Orlando a lot, and I see that it's just a mixed vibe, just like everywhere else in Orlando. But then Palm Beach Garden is not that way.
Not at all. Well, I want to thank you both for being here.
Appreciate it.
We keep having the discussion. Always,
Yeah.
it's
We need to
always
keep
sort
having
of the
it.
same thing. But
It's a never a dull moment. I think that Trump is learning along the way, and we're all kind of learning with him.
I hope so.
And
He's
Mark,
definitely
I gotta
learning.
say, Mark, I'm sure you stand out literally in China. I mean, because you stand out here in America, but I'm thinking in China,
I made a comment
it's
like that
amazing.
years ago when I went to Chinatown, and I made sort of a joke about that on Leno or something like that, and I got in major trouble, and they said that I was being racist.
I have a quick story. I was in Shanghai. I was walking downtown by the Bund, and this lady was walking next to me, videotaping me while I was walking down the street, and I'm just looking at her, and she's just like, I'm just like, okay. So they got a kick out of me.
Yeah, no, just in terms of height. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like extra, extra large in clothing in China, and over here I'm like extra small. So
And he's sitting on the floor now. You don't.
Yes.
realize.
Yeah, I was
You
going to
can't
say.
see it.
It's always rough to sit next to somebody.
And I'm sure he's never heard us.
Well, my
speak
size over there is 4XX. I said, no, it's extra large in U.S. No, it's 4XXL. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that.
Not good for the ego. Not good for the ego. Michael Starr Hopkins and Mark Blount, thank you very much
you.
Thanks
for
for
joining
having
us today.
Thanks.
What was your take on the whole? Now I've gone well past the 3 number, but what was your whole take on the Cafefe situation?
Well, I think it was a very human moment.
It was, but do you?
Yes.
It was. I don't think. I think it was actually kind of cute. I think
thought
he was.
it was.
Hold on, but I'm not finished. I've always got a caveat. It was a little kind of cute. I think he probably was half asleep. He had
Yeah,
he
he
was
was.
tired. He had a long trip overseas. He had a heck of a week traveling. He probably he might have taken an Ambien. Who knows? I don't know. But what was very interesting is that they doubled down on it. I mean, would it not have been more responsible just to say, you know what, the president was tired, he made a mistake, let's move on. But no, they said, no, that's what he meant to say. And there are a few people who know. Did that not make you roll your eyes a bit? No, because you don't roll your eyes at anything he does.
Well, in general, I don't like to roll my eyes. I'm not a cynical person.
I do it enough for both of us.
Yeah, that's true. We have a lot of memes. We're going to make a collection of memes of Clay rolling his eyes. But
Let's move on to,
I do agree, though. I agree in this case, they should have owned it. They should have said, he made a mistake. Yeah.
Give it a good name, right?
Let's bring in a
people
couple
don't know
comments here, though. Judy Anderson says that Trump is a White House apprentice. Paula Strong says he only wants the yes people. And in terms of media bias, Mickey Alessi says even bad behavior gets media coverage.
And some people believe that no press is bad press, right?
But well, I think that's very much the Trump mantra.
And well, he's certainly done a good job of kind of twisting bad press to be a benefit to him.
Well, no, his supporters, I believe in media bias is very real. So a lot of his supporters, they appreciate the fact that he's calling it out.
I think it's real too. I think it's real on both sides. But anyways, let's move on to our Bookster segment. Sarah Hill's not with us today, but we have a guest that I'm sort of excited about. Someone who I know, someone not from North Carolina, but you kind of adopted home state.
Oh yeah, with Clay, I spent about 10 years in the 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg, and then of course, I was Wake County Superintendent for a couple of years. I was Secretary of Transportation for about 3 years, and I remember last seeing you. You were on the campaign trail, and you came to a town hall meeting that I was holding, and I was proud of you for being there. And your big bus was out there. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Tony Tata, General. I would say Secretary Tata, but should I call you? I mean, you've had a lot of titles. General Tata.
Because we should explain what's the Secretary.
Let's do the introduction.
All his
How about I
titles.
do that? Former Brigadier General of the U.S. Army for 30 plus years, almost 40 years. Former Superintendent of the school system that I did my entire school career in, and former Secretary of Transportation for North Carolina. Tony Tata is with us.
And also a national best-selling author, hence the Bookster connection. So
Probably we're going to sit here and just chill and talk about stuff. So we need to do the
basically a
introduction.
Renaissance man, where if there's something to do, he's done it. So his current book is national bestseller, Besieged, which is spy thriller talking about terrorism. Well, tell us about that first.
Yeah, so I started writing a long time ago when I was a little kid. I just loved to write, and I started getting these book contracts about 7-8 years ago. I've got 7 novels out now, and I'm with Kensington Books and St. Martin's Press, and this is a Kensington book thriller. Jake Mahegan, he's a Native American from the Outer Banks of North Carolina, Frisco, and he's a waterman, 6.5 foot tall, and he's former Delta Force. And you can read these books in any order. I kind of shrink wrap them so that there's no carryover from one to the other. And the sort of the log line of this book is Mahegan has to rescue an 11-year-old autistic savant girl code writer that has been captured by Iranian special forces in southeastern North Carolina, who want her to write this code to make autonomous vehicles communicate and converge on certain places because they've created autonomous vehicles that have bombs in them, kind of sort of like.
First of all, do we have Iranian special forces in southeastern North Carolina?
For sure. And there were many of your constituents.
I'm
that you were
worried about
running for
that. I don't know
Congress.
about that.
It's great line.
A lot of people, a lot of folks leave the public service, which you have been in every echelon of, and move into sort of, I mean, I kind of did the backwards way. I did the entertainment world first and then did the political thing. But a lot of people tend to move from the political world into entertainment / fiction / and then oftentimes use what they learned in their former career
Right.
to guide their ability to tell stories like this. Are there things that you find in your books were not just guided by your military experience, but by what you learned through the political process?
Absolutely, Clay. And I've spent a lifetime of trying to figure out what is the worst thing that could happen to my troops in combat, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Kosovo or whatever. And you can be standing as a commander and know that you've got 3 10, 25,000 of America's finest under your charge, and you're responsible for them. And so my mind was continuously cycling, what's the worst thing that can happen? What do I need? What am I doing that I shouldn't be? And what am I not doing that I should be? Kind of thing. And so when I was secretary for this book, I went out and visited Tesla and to see their technology, talk about autonomous cars and all that. And I'm standing in the factory, and the way my mind works is I'm thinking, wow, what if bad guys were actually making these autonomous cars and putting 155 artillery shells in the back of them? And
That's how your brain works.
Yeah, that's how my brain works. So, yeah. And so, and I said, that's a great plot for a book. And then suddenly, I write Besieged, and it becomes, it flies off the shelf. So,
Well, you got to stay ahead of the curve. That's what we want in our military forces. So the fact that you can bring that military knowledge to do something that is, true to life.
That's a great point, Carrie. I wrote a book called Rogue Threat in my previous series, and it was all about a Chinese merchant ship that had a shell of containers, not actual containers, and inside that shell was an aircraft carrier of unmanned aerial vehicles that had bombs on them. And today, the number one problem in Iraq, ISIS has figured out how to use UAVs and put bombs on them and send them into our base camps. And so that's a number one issue that we're struggling with today. And to me, it was just a sort of a fantasy of this is something the enemy could do 10 years ago when I wrote that book. And now today, it's a tactic that the enemy's using.
No, I mean, we see this all the time in sci-fi where people are, envisioning things that could happen in the future, and lo and behold, it happened. So I think, military fiction is no different. Pamela Wiley Ackerman says on Facebook, "I'm so jealous of anyone that loves to write."
Sort of feel the same way. Do you enjoy the
Yeah.
I spoke with an interviewer, a Washington Post reporter who I talked to during my campaign, who said a line that I love. He said, "I don't like writing, but I love having written." Do you like the process? Or do
I
you
love
like
the
product?
process. So when I'm in the process and I'm in that flow, and I have I turn off internet, I turn off my phone, and I am just writing. I have no distraction. I feel like I'm an actor in my own story, and I'm in there. And you write from 2, 3, 4 points of view in a book, at least I do. And so I had to learn about an 11-year-old autistic savant girl. I read 4 books. I watched countless YouTube videos. And so the research is as much fun as it is for me to create. And I feel like I'm shaping and creating as I'm writing. And to me, that's the fun part. The editing, not so much fun. But yeah, I'm kind of like,
When someone's telling you what to change.
where were you when the page was blank is kind of what I'm
Do you always have one book in the process, or do you have 17 ideas in your head and you're trying to do more than one?
I'm putting out 2 books a year now, and
That's amazing.
yeah,
Wow.
so it's like it takes me. I do 1,000 words a day as my goal,
Really?
and sometimes I'll do 2, sometimes I'll do 500 words, and but my goal is to average about 1,000 words a day. So in 3-4 months, you've got a rough draft. Send that into the editor, then you start the next one, and you have this sort of overlapping process. I can't work on 2 books at one time, but in the creative mode. But once I get something pretty nailed down, then I can move to the next idea. And fortunately or unfortunately, there's an endless stream of ideas out there, just given the nature of the technology changing and global geopolitics and all of that kind of thing. So it's fun.
Let me ask a stupid question. What's more enjoyable? Writing fiction or dealing with the political process?
Well, I'll tell you, Clay, the most satisfying job I've had in my career. I mean, I love serving soldiers and leading. Being superintendent of your former school district, Wake County Public Schools, I felt in my heart that I was that was my calling, and I was serving 150,000 students, 300,000 parents, 18,000 employees. And
Largest school district in North Carolina. About, what,
15th in the country, 18,000 employees and 170 schools. And I got into every school in my first year as superintendent. And I went into elementary school, 104 elementary schools. I went into just about every classroom and shook their hand. Both my parents were public school teachers. You can see I'm passionate about this. And I shook their hand and I said, thanks for what you do. And if it was just a 30-second interaction, I had teachers walking out crying, saying, I've never met a I've never had a superintendent come to my classroom. And I'm like, you deserve to be thanked for what you do.
How do you get kids to read more? They're constantly on their phone. I mean, I'm on my phone phones all the time. I mean, what's the prospect of reading for a generation that doesn't know how to hold a book?
But yeah, especially a book versus
Yeah.
just like a 2-second meme.
Well, hardcovers are coming back, and then the Wimpy Kid thing, and the Dork Diaries, and all of that. And I think creating content is the best thing you can do to get people to read. And so being able to penetrate that market and create the content for younger children, because I'll tell you, I was one of those nerds that would come home from elementary school with an armful of books from book fair day, and I would just lock myself in my room and read and get lost in the fictional world, and it was so much fun. And those children still are out there, and that's what they want. And just don't give them the phone until they become a teenager or something.
Well,
Yeah.
no, you got lots of a very interesting story, lots of different facets to your career. Any nonfiction prospects for you?
Yeah, I've been asked to do some nonfiction stuff, and right now I've got a good problem. I've got so much fiction work lined up for the next couple of years that I don't know that I'd be able to squeeze a nonfiction thing in there unless I cloned myself. Or
38 years in the
which
Army.
could happen.
38, right? 38 years.
What, 28 years?
28 years
Yeah,
in the
28
Army.
years.
Right.
in the-
28, sorry.
Yeah.
28 years in the Army, superintendent of schools, secretary of transportation for a state. You got to be a long book, right?
Yeah, well, and chief operating officer with Michelle Rhee of Washington, D.C. Public Schools, right at the eye of the hurricane of education reform. Michelle's an awesome leader and friend, and we just, being in that really gave me that hard break from military into education, because that was the eye of the hurricane of education reform right there. And then Wake County reached out to me, and I came in there, and that was a community that needed healing, and I felt like I walked right down the middle very well on that. And then the governor asked me to be Secretary of Transportation, and so I've enjoyed all of my public service. Now I'm enjoying being a private businessman, creating jobs, having a business, and writing books. So.
Well, and I want to ask about that transition for you from the military, which I'm not in the military, my brother's in the military, but the perception of the military is it's very command and control, it's very cookie cutter, you just take orders, it's very hierarchical by nature, that's the way it's set up. And now you're doing something that's incredibly creative and just free flowing, you're sole entrepreneur in that way. How did you go from that kind of very structured environment to doing something so creative? And did some of your former colleagues think, like, what the hell is this guy doing? He's
Well,
kind
he
of
was in
crazy.
charge.
Well, yeah, no, I bet.
Well, but that's a great question, Carrie, because the perception of the military is this hierarchy, but in reality, in Afghanistan, I had 91 forward operating bases, and I couldn't be at all 91 at any given time, and so you have to respect and trust your subordinates, and these were captains and sergeants that were in charge out there on the Pakistan border or the Iranian border or wherever, and you give them guidance and let them execute, and you have a very flat organization. You've got a little headquarters thing up in Bagram was where our headquarters was, and you have daily reports and all that. But the operations, they're being run independently and separately. And so you've got to be creative in the military, or you're not going to, because the military is all about solving problems.
Well, I'm going to resist the urge to start asking you about hierarchy and the president and how he does his.
Well,
we won't do that for
I
you.
think we should have a question here. We got a question.
Hey, I'm fine with it. It's
from
going to be a tough political one. Get ready.
I think you can handle it. From Sydney Piper, it says, what does he think of Betsy DeVos?
Well, the understanding growth and performance as the two key academic metrics are key to anybody in the education world. I think that her support of parental choice is a very strong characteristic that she has. And even talking with Michelle, who interviewed with President-elect Trump at the time, you never want to take choice away. And so having a choice advocate, I think, is probably a good thing, because public schools, and I know that when Wake County, Clay, we had gotten to a point where we thought we were the only game in town, and then charters were coming up, privates were coming up, stealing market share. And I got asked a question at a town hall meeting, what do you think of charters? And I said, I love charter schools, but my job as superintendent of the public school system is put every charter school out of business because there's no better option for parents than our public schools. And so
I like that.
That's you know, so
We're going to move to this because we've got to wrap up. I'm getting here. Sue Ruderskold says, Anthony Tata, I like you. Please write a book about the importance of a good, solid public education. So that answer that he just gave, I think I agree with you on that.
I think that was
There's
a good
book for
answer
you.
because you want the public schools to perform.
Yeah.
And so if it's lighting a fire under you, then by all means.
that's right. And with 2 public school teacher parents, that would probably be the best book for me to write.
There you go.
Yeah,
There you go.
yeah,
We'll look
great.
for it. It's important to note, I know him as Tony Tata. You know him as Anthony Tata. It's AJ Tata on his book. So when you go look
right.
for his book, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Bookstore.
Yeah,
of course. You can find it
they're in bookstores everywhere. Yes.
Tony Tata, AJ Tata, Anthony Tata,
General
whatever you call
Tata.
him. General Tata.
That's a lot better than a lot of things I've been called. So.
Go find his new book, Besieged, and his entire series, which he's got some national bestsellers in. So thank you very much for
Thank
joining,
you.
Secretary.
Thank you, Clay.
And thank you guys very much for joining us. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., Bold
Business.
And we're back here on Friday, right after the testimony of James Comey.
Comey.
It'll be a good one. You won't want to miss that. Friday morning at 10. Thanks so much, guys. See you next week.